Welcome to the Bearded Berens, where we analyze topics of the day in the light of the scriptures.
Welcome to the Bearded Berens. My name is Cole. I'm joined with Max and Jason, and we're excited. Well, I'm excited.
Well, somebody's
We're
excited.
always excited.
Speak for yourself.
This is an exciting show to me. I am stoked. I am pumped. What other emotional words can I use? I am happy to present to you guys the essay by Neil Gordon. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but first, what did you guys bring to the party?
Well, I brought myself, first of all. I mean, there is no party without KGB.
That's right. Yeah. So what did the communists bring?
We don't even have to include him in this part anymore, you know?
No, we don't. In case you guys are just listening, and
that's all I can afford these days. So there's no money.
All you can afford, a $10 stick is all you can afford. All right. So in case you were listening and not watching, Max's response to my question was him waving a padrone at the camera. Actually, it was like it was swimming in the camera. So thank you for that. Is it
inspired? Floating.
Yeah. Is that a 4,000?
Yes.
Of course.
Thou shalt not want. It's a Maduro as well.
Maduro's a good stick from them. All right, Jason, what do you got?
Yeah, I just have the other half of the Valkyrie that I had last time.
Am I the only one bringing variety to this show?
Why wouldn't anybody smoke Valkyrie out of all cigars?
Well, I am smoking by my favorite blender, mixer, whatever you call them, AJ Fernandez New World. Fantastic stick.
Great
it's been
stick.
A while since I've had one, and I'm looking forward to smoking this. I almost said excited again, and I decided not to.
I appreciate you, Cole, that you bring something that we're not ashamed of to share on our podcast. You bring a half a stick, who knows what it is. He comes up with a fancy name, Valkyrie. And some people just cannot be really trusted with any choices of cigars.
Some people cannot be trusted with their choices in cigars.
I'll accept that.
I think that's true.
Cole, where did you come across that stick?
So I came across this stick at a place in, not Denton, Decatur, Texas. I was going to get my hair cut because I was starting to look like an ape. And it was like a 2-hour wait. And so I looked on the phone. They're like, we'll call you whenever it's your turn. Cool. Looked at my phone. There was a cigar shop right down the road.
That's called Providence.
It's like, what Providence is this? We should rewrite What Child Is This and do What Providence Is This? Anyway. Amen. So actually it was really cool because he had little coasters on the lounge area, the seats that had the Chi Rho and the Alpha and Omega on them. And so I picked it up and said, "Hey, what flavor of Christian are you?" And he kind of laughed and he goes, "I'm the OG." I'm like, "Oh, don't tell me." He's like, "Yep, I'm a Catholic." I'm like, oh, okay. Well, let's talk about our common salvation in the Lord Christ alone, by grace alone, through faith alone, which he did say. He affirms sola fide. He says the only sola he does not affirm is sola scriptura.
Yep.
And I said, well, we have plenty to work on there. So I do consider him a brother in the Lord, though he had a lot of good things to say. He rejects certain aspects of the Vatican II Council and areas of Trent. So I was pleased with our meeting.
Well, wait a minute. If he rejects sola scriptura, and then he's also rejecting what Vatican II says, that leaves him with a little bit of a problem, doesn't it?
Not only does it leave him with a bit of a problem there, but he also despises the Pope in Rome. And he didn't go so far as to call him the Antichrist, but he said certainly an Antichrist spirit.
Wow.
So he's got a little bit of an inconsistency I don't think he could see yet we actually had to dart. Another customer came up and I had to go, but it was a fantastic conversation. I enjoyed every minute of it, actually. So
That's good, man. So
yeah,
you smoked the
blessed
new world.
inconsistencies are what saves us sometimes. What?
You smoked the new world at that conversation. That's your second one.
No, so the New World was the second one that I bought, but he actually recommended this. It was unframed or un something. I'll have to look at the label. That was a phenomenal smoke. He has our flavor profile, Max. So he's into the dark, oily stuff, and it was probably the
Nice.
most flavorful cigar I've smoked this year for sure.
Nice.
When it comes to complexities and things like that. So
I'm glad you
New
like it.
World,
New world for a while, but I had it on maybe 15 years ago, and I remember I wasn't disappointed.
yeah.
But I'm gonna pick up one this or next week. I would like to give it another shot just to join you in your little taste bud
I feel the
experience.
solidarity there, man. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I feel supported in more ways than that, which our viewers don't have to know. But I do feel supported by you guys in a very real way. Just wanted to say that on the record.
We love you. You're one of
Love
us.
you guys. Love you guys. So let's move into the podcast proper. I'm gonna have to start putting timestamps because some of the feedback I've gotten is we don't want to listen to you guys and your cigar talk. So we'll have to put a place for people to jump to. But we like cigars, so some
What?
of you might like cigars as well.
Who doesn't want to listen to our cigar talk? Give me their name. I'm gonna ban them right now.
You
What's
want to
the
ban
name?
them? Ban
I'm
Hammer.
gonna use it. This is like insult.
Can y'all hear that?
One of them is my wife, just so you know.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So
Would you please
you're gonna
go
ban?
listen to your wife and teach her some manners?
Well,
But we probably should like say like like a 10 minutes in we start a show for sure, something like that, or I don't know, whatever you want to do is fine with me. I'm sure people would love to hear that as well. So there's that.
well,
Cole, what are you so excited about today?
we're getting to talk about Neil Gordon and his third counter argument rebuttal, which we're talking about counter arguments to the idea that secession is a viable I don't know. What would you say? Counter arguments to secession as a viable
Means of
reaction.
counter-revolution. Yeah.
Yeah, means of counter revolution. Yeah. So I really am looking forward to this because generally when people dismiss secession out of hand, they've never even heard of this court case. But if they're well read at all, it is brought up and shown or said, well, see here, it's been decided that secession, basically that the United States is perpetual, which is a joke. There's nothing in this life that is perpetual other than our Lord, which is an interesting discussion as well. And so it's demonstrably false because historically, well, we'll get into all that in a minute. But it is to me something that should be considered by everybody that brings this argumentation up. They don't they look at the precedent and they move forward, right? They look at the precedent and say that's good. They don't actually look at the fact that it was a bootleg decision. Like if you're a conservative right now and you don't think that the Supreme Court can get it wrong, hello, Roe v. Wade, right? Bootleg decision turned back on its face 40 years later.
Yep.
I'm okay with that. So I think that courts can get it wrong and do get it wrong often. So anyway, that's why I'm excited. Jay, are you excited about this little portion of our podcast?
I am, yeah. You maybe can't tell, but I am excited.
Yeah, you're
Oh,
seething with emotion.
we
Yeah.
see your wrinkles on your face. I mean, they're ecstatic.
Yeah. My
Like you
daughter
can.
tells me that something happens with my eyebrows when I get either angry or intense or excited or something. So she could tell. But yes, I am excited.
That's great. So tell me why you're excited.
Well, for a number of reasons. One, I just kind of like constitutional law. I find it really interesting. You know, I tell people I work with that, you know, I work at a school, a Christian school, and I tell them if I were interested,
work at a school.
I tell them if I were interested in the money, I would have gone to law school rather than seminary. And I think I probably would have, but I'm not really interested in the money, so I went to seminary instead. But no, we get to pick up today where we left off last time. We're walking through this section of Neil Gordon's essay where he's making the case for secession of the states as a means of counter-revolution. He's making the case that it's actually constitutional and legal to do. And he says at the beginning of this section of the essay, and I would like to reiterate, that secession is not synonymous with insurrection. It's not synonymous with civil war. It's not synonymous with any kind of violence or seeking to overthrow the government or anything like that. Everything that Neil is talking about and everything that we're talking about on this podcast is peaceful by nature, and we would like to avoid violent conflict at just about all costs.
Because as Christians, we love our neighbors.
Yes.
Right? We're commanded to love our neighbors, even if we
Yes.
disagree with them.
We want to
at
live
every
for
point.
lives in Christ Jesus. We have no desire for violence.
Amen.
Yep.
Amen.
And neither does Neil Gordon in his essay. And he's made the case that the Constitution in Amendment 10 actually reserves for the states and the people the right to secede, or at least the right to govern secession of states from the Union. And then he gives three common counter arguments that come against that. We addressed the first two last time, and then we sort of introduced the third one, and we'll dive into it in a bit more detail today. But it's rooted in this this Reconstruction era Civil War case, Supreme Court case, Texas versus White, in which the majority opinion concluded that the Union is perpetual and therefore a state can never leave. And then that is then said, well, here's the precedent. It's been decided legally the Union is perpetual. Therefore, the question of secession has been answered and it can't happen. But Neil argues that it actually can happen. He argues against the court case itself. And then he actually says towards the end, but you know what? If you want to accept the precedent, go right ahead. And then there's a nice little backdoor solution. Not even a backdoor solution.
Clever.
I don't know what to call it.
We'll say
a clever solution. There you go. A clever solution. So I think it'd be good if we give just a summary of the case. I doubt very many people have read Texas versus White or read the opinions from it or even know what the facts of the case are. And then we can walk through the problems with it. And then I think it'd be good just to talk about these kinds of things from a biblical perspective and see what kind of light we can shine on it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start. So who was White and why was Texas and White in a struggle?
Okay, so during the Civil War, the legislature of Texas had sold bonds to a gentleman named George White. And after the Civil War, during Reconstruction, the Reconstruction Texas legislature, which was set up by the federal government, of course, actually sued George White for him to return the bonds to the state legislature, claiming that they were the rightful owners of those bonds. And their argument was that the Civil War era Confederate legislature of Texas that sold the bonds was an illegitimate government and therefore didn't have the right to sell the bonds. And therefore, George White was an illegitimate owner of the bonds, and it was his duty to return them to the proper owner, which was the actual legislature of Texas. So they claimed. And so really
Sounds
the
like
Supreme
theft to me, but
so the actual case dealt with these with the question of who actually owns these bonds and does White have to return them or not. But sort of embedded in that was this question of, was the Texas legislature during the war, the Confederate Texas legislature, was that a legitimate government or was it not a legitimate government? And what the court ended up considering was whether or not Texas actually left the Union when it voted to secede, or whether it stayed in the Union. So those were the actual circumstances of the case, and it was decided in a 5-3 vote that the sale of the bonds was illegal because Texas had remained a state even though it voted to secede, thus putting Texas under military jurisdiction during its rebellion, making the Confederate legislature in Texas illegitimate. So in other words, they didn't have the right to sell the bonds because the bonds belonged to the state, and the state was controlled by the federal government at that time because it was under military jurisdiction. It's really quite fascinating, all the little pieces that are involved in this.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting because generally speaking, whenever you even when you study, cursory, you take cursory looks at court cases in school, high school, things like that, you never really go to the implications of the case. You pretty much just talk about what happened, Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education. You think about all these landmark cases that have myriad implications, but the interesting thing about this case is that the implication is, from from the decision is that the United States is perpetual and unbreakable, unsecedable. And so I think it's also another interesting thing is nobody wants to pass judgment on whether that was a right decision or not. And I think an interesting thing about the modern mind is, especially in America, is they don't want to have to pass judgment on it because they don't want to have to think. And because they don't want to have to think, they're enslaved. And so why are we taking a look at this case? Because we want to think. We want to pass judgment on this case and how it was decided. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why do we pass judgment as Christians on things like that? Just a little segue, a little deviation here. Why is that important to do?
Well, first of all, we are called to judge all things.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, we judge all things every day. Those people still say that we don't judge, they're liars. You make a judgmental decision on hundreds of occasions in your daily life. And furthermore, we have to make a judgment on this one because it depends on how we react and how we are to behave in reference to the Constitution. Furthermore, we have to also make a judgment between the scriptures and the Constitution because we're talking about this case. Because I would even argue further saying, even if the Constitution was written in perpetual and stuff, yada, 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 at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge the following that is true to us as Christians, that the Holy Scriptures, the Holy Writings supersede any kind of constitution written by man. So if we even to go this route and say, well, there was a country, there was a union made, it was a perpetual union, yada, 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 but tomorrow Texas becomes a Christian nation, because they're free in Christ, they can walk away. And that's a different, maybe, discussion. But I think for us as Christians, it's important to understand the differences between all of these things. And then once we draw the conclusion, then we can make a proper decision how to behave. But if we don't judge also, we're going to become, what is it called, those serfs. We can serve them, That's what serfs do. Serfs blindly obey their masters, and ask questions. We are not serfs. We are slaves of Jesus Christ. But we ask him questions. He gives us answers, and such as goes in our union. And our constitution requires us to ask questions and petition our government and question our government, make sure our government is in line with what they are to do. But our rights come from God, not from our government. And therefore, we have to ask and question what they do in every single thing they do, if it's aligned with the scriptures or not. That's my personal opinion.
As a slave to Jesus Christ, we are free men.
Amen.
I like that paradox.
Amen.
Yeah.
Free in Christ as his bond servants. Amen.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Professor, we can move on. I think that's an important thing for people listening that maybe aren't used to passing judgment on things such as a court case.
We should not pass hypocritical judgment, and that's a different discussion. That's not what we're talking about. But we are to judge all things.
We're to judge rightly. Matthew 7,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. Judge rightly. So what I'd like to do is give you the argument that Salmon Chase, the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice who actually wrote the opinion.
Sounds fishy, man.
Salmon Chase.
Yeah. Sounds fishy.
I don't know. Maybe it's whatever. I'm not going to go there. Is that how you say his name? Salom?
Salom?
Salmon. Or AN.
Yeah, I think that's it.
I got it written down here.
The salmon, I mean, it's written exactly the same way.
Right.
Salmon.
It's written the same. That's why I wouldn't want to say salmon if I was him. Let's say Solomon, like you said.
It sounds better, Salmon, than salmon. Salmon Chase.
Yeah, so that's a good question.
All right, anyways, the Chief Justice Chase, who wrote the majority opinion for this case, his argument is not really an ontological argument about the nature of the union. It's really more of a historical argument where he observes that the union, he thinks, was perpetual before, therefore it's perpetual now. But here's how his argument essentially goes, is that he says that the nature of the union under the Articles of Confederation was a perpetual union. And that is language in the Articles. It uses the language of forming a perpetual union. And then he says, the Constitution came in and displaced the Articles of Confederation. And the Constitution was written, as we know, quote, in order to create or to form a more perfect union. And so his argument is essentially that a perpetual union could not be made more perfect without maintaining its perpetuity. So if it's perpetual under the Articles and the Constitution makes it better, then it must still be perpetual. So in other words, he's saying that the perpetuity of the union is assumed by the Constitution, even if it doesn't say that the union is perpetual. So that is essentially the argument behind the Texas versus White decision. And you're probably already thinking of numerous problems with the argument.
Well, one of them, I'm just thinking, like, what if the EU had that type of language, right? Like, what if NAFTA or whatever other agreement anybody has had that same argumentation? Like, it just doesn't work. It's more perfect. It's more perfect because it can never be, a lease. Do we want to make a lease more perfect by making it perpetual? That doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It's actually a good thing for most people that a lease is 1 year And so making it more perfect might be making it 6 months. Anyway.
Yeah, he's equating more perfect with perpetual.
Right.
And he's equating best actually with perpetual. Anyway, we'll get into the logic in his argument here in just a minute. But I want to bring up one thing, and I mentioned this because Gordon mentions it in the essay. He brings up the principle of, and I'm probably not going to say it correctly, stare decisis. Is that how you say that? It's a legal doctrine that deals with precedent. It's basically the legal principle, the legal practice, the legal doctrine that says if a precedent has been set, we follow it. So this is the function of Supreme Court cases in constitutional law, is they set precedent, and then that then controls decisions in the future. And so really the question is, do we apply stare decisis or precedent in this case?
Yeah.
No, the question is, do we apply the precedent set by Texas versus White today to the question of secession, or should it be overruled? And of course, it never would be overruled unless it came before the court again, and it hasn't come before the court. So it's never been addressed in any sort of legal context. So I think Neil Gordon wrote this essay shortly after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And in the essay, he quotes from Samuel Alito and refers, so in overturning Roe v. Wade, Alito identifies a number of factors that come into play whenever the court overrules precedent. And of course, they were overruling the precedent set by Roe v. Wade. And two of the factors that he lists, Gordon says, are pertinent to our question here in Texas versus White. And those two factors are the nature of the court's error. And I think what is meant here is really the significance, the bigness of the error, in that and that it impacts the nation on a large scale, right? If they made an error that dealt with, some obscure thing that impacted, one farmer and the county government and nobody else, it's not an issue, right? But in something that impacts literally the entire nation, well, if they erred in it, then yeah, we should probably seek to overrule it. And then the other factor identified by Alito is the quality of the reasoning used in the decision. So in other words, if there's flaws in the logic of the conclusion that led to the conclusion, then that logic, the flaw in that logic, should be identified and the conclusion tossed out. So what Neil does here next in the essay is he addresses those two things, the nature of the error, and then he spends a lot of time just dismantling the logic behind Chief Justice Chase's conclusion. So the first one's real quick, and I'll just give it to you. The nature of the error. Gordon says, just like, and you already mentioned this, Plessy versus Ferguson or Roe v. Wade, the court erred so egregiously in Texas versus White because it actually stole from the states a right that is reserved to them in the Constitution. And so the conclusion that was reached in Texas versus White actually set that court case on a collision course with the Constitution that would inevitably happen. The 10th Amendment and Texas versus White would eventually collide at some point in the future because the error was so egregious in the conclusion. And so it's been 155 years. They haven't collided yet, but it's inevitable that they do. And so that's the first factor. It's an egregious error, and it is inevitable that this question be raised again and addressed again because they've been set on a collision course.
It will be.
They've been set on a collision course just by virtue of the ruling itself, but also, I mean, it's apparent that we're on that collision course in the doings and happenings of America at this moment.
Today.
Yep. Today. And I really do need to look back on what's going on the border right now. I know there's all sorts of stories about atrocities committed by people that have been deported and come back over, and all that's terrible. But it is amazing how history seems to be repeating itself with the same nullification-like crisis. In where once it was a legislature issue, this time it's a Supreme Court judicial issue that's potentially being nullified. The history has a way of repeating itself if the problems that created that initially they have not been addressed in a full way. And this court case seems to be just that, a Band-Aid that's staunched bleeding, but it's because of that became gangrenous, and we're about to chop a limb off. How do you like that? That is a visceral metaphor, but I like it.
It's good.
Thank you. I just came up that, top of my head.
Well, you got to think about when this court case happened, too. It was 1869. So this is, 4 years after Lincoln is assassinated. The Civil War is just coming to an end. We're at the beginning of Reconstruction. And there very much is this sense that we need to view the Union as being perpetual. And, I think it was very easy just to think in those terms without realizing what it might cause 155 years later. Yeah.
That's often the way Band-Aids are applied. You don't think about what's going to happen later. You just...
No, it's just to take care of the problem at that very moment, and what happens later, we'll deal with that then. We see this happening all the time in our debt ceiling issues. We keep raising our debt ceilings and stuff and budgets, and we're going to print more money. Well, the day will come when printing more money is not going to work. So
I heard we can borrow money forever.
Coming to us as a freight train, such as a question as this, coming our way as a freight train as well, which will have to be dealt with.
Let's talk about the quality of the reasoning, because this is actually really fascinating. Sometimes I wonder how people who think like this get to positions where they make decisions that impact so many people, But then, of course, I wonder about myself and what it says about me that I'm nowhere near those positions. So maybe that means I'm even worse. I don't know. But at the core of his argument is he's equating more perfect with perpetual. But the problem is that he nowhere argues for more better or more perfect and perpetual being the same thing, right?
Speaking of good thinking, more better. Was that really what you were going to say?
It's actually better than more perfect, because you can't be more perfect, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But still, it's he talks about it is more perfect. It's no longer perpetual. That's what the Constitution did.
Okay. Well, yes, it very well. It very well could be that. In fact, Neil Gordon actually references that. He says that you could make the opposite argument using the same logic and reach the opposite conclusion. You could say the Union was perpetual. The Constitution made it better. Therefore, the Union is no longer perpetual.
Exactly. That's exactly the same principle, same logic.
Now, what I just gave you is not a sound syllogism, right?
No.
So the Union was perpetual. That's premise one. Premise two, the Articles made it better. Conclusion, the Union is no longer perpetual.
Or the Union is...
Yeah, what did I say?
You said the Articles. Okay. So, number one, the first premise is...
The Union is perpetual under the Articles.
Yep.
Okay.
Premise two, the Constitution made it better, more perfect.
Yep.
Conclusion, well, Chase's conclusion is that it must be perpetual. Well, why can't I conclude that it must be not perpetual? The argument doesn't include that information.
No.
it's an unsound argument. It's bad logic. A sound syllogism would be like, all men are strong. James is a man. Therefore, we know that James is strong. The conclusion necessarily follows from the premises because it's actually included in the premises.
Yeah.
Right? But if I were to say that, let's see, the table is good. My neighbor came and fixed it, and so it's better now. Therefore, what? I don't know. The argument doesn't tell us.
Yeah, exactly.
You can say anything. Neil throws out the argument. He says, the house across the street has 2 bedrooms. The one next to it is better. So how many bedrooms does the one next to it have? I don't know. The argument doesn't tell us. And neither does Chase's argument tell us whether or not being made more perfect actually keeps it perpetual or changes it to not perpetual. So, I mean, this is stuff that in a classical Christian school, we would be teaching to 7th graders.
Right.
And they would look at this argument and spot the error in the logic right away.
Right. But because we've been completely devoid of any logic classes over the last 30 years, other than those that have been sought out by the students themselves. Well, I guess we could go back even further than that, but go ahead. Yeah.
So Gordon then says this. He says the absurdity of Chase's conclusion comes into full light with this statement. The union between Texas and the other states was as complete, as perpetual, and indissoluble as the union between the original states. Therefore, there was no place for reconsideration or revocation except through revolution or through consent of the states.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the contradiction there should be glaring to everyone. According to Chase, the union among the states is perpetual and indissoluble, and there's no way that it can ever be changed until it's changed. Except for these circumstances. It's completely perpetual unless something happens that makes it not perpetual anymore.
Right.
That's like saying that something is immutable until it changes. Well,
of course.
It's like saying it's light outside until it's dark. Well, I suppose so. It doesn't make any sense. It's a non sequitur. There's contradictions all throughout it. It's amazing, really. I'll tell you, when I first read this Supreme Court case, I did some research on this, in years back, and teaching Civil War in high school, those kinds of things. When I first read this case and came across it, I was like, oh man, maybe secession really, has been decided already. And I'm like preparing myself for some grand argument that's going to convince me that no state can ever leave again. And this is what I saw. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I had to actually check and see, I'm on the Cornell Law webpage. Like, has this thing been hacked? Like, there's no way this is actually what the Supreme Court ruled. But it is. That's what they decided.
To make that argument work, you'd have to define what better is. You'd have to provide that. You can't just assume that better is more perpetual. It just, so it's filled with assumptions that kill the syllogism. It's filled with assumptions that kill any kind of reasonable analysis of it. So the question I think has to become, it's like, what was the decision? Did you say 5-3?
Yeah, it was 5-3.
So I would love to read the decision. I haven't read any of the, other than what Neil has written. I haven't done any of the research, but I would love to read the dissenting opinions.
So
that would be an interesting exercise.
That would be interesting. I have not read the dissenting opinions, or if I have, I don't remember it. But in the essay, Gordon's got the footnotes for where all this information can be found. He's got the links right there. So it all comes from Cornell's Law School, their webpage. They've got every Supreme Court case and all the opinions ever all archived there. So yeah, pull up the essay and just copy those links. You'll find it. And you could just Google it and you'll get to Cornell's law page.
Right.
So we've pretty well debunked the logic in, or Neil Gordon has at least debunked the logic in Chase's argument. But Gordon goes on from there and he says, let's take a look at the historical record. Chase is claiming that the Constitution assumes perpetuity, but Gordon then points out the historical record of the simple fact that secession remained an ongoing question from the ratification of the Constitution all the way up to 1860. This was a common thing.
Absolutely. Well, Texas and its assurances that it had the ability to remove itself and fly its flag at the same height. I did actually confirm some of that since the last episode. It very much was in the discussion. Why would you, as a sovereign state, join with other states and not have the ability to back out? That doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense.
In Texas history, when Texas became free from Mexico, was it 32? Yeah,
1832,
34.
I can't remember. 1836, I think. But
it came out of what I cannot see possibly a state coming out of one place, proclaiming its independence, and going right back into another union and saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, we're just going to give up any of our rights. We're not going to be able ever to live."
Right, and that's just Texas, but I mean, like any state that's joining.
Yeah, but in general speaking of Texas, right?
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, it had to have been part of it.
Yeah, to push it a little bit further, as we discussed last time, the Congress has the constitutional power to admit states to the Union. And in that process, a state basically, they write a bill that says, hey, we want to join. Congress passes a resolution. I don't know if I'm using the right terms here, but they pass a resolution that basically authorizes the state to write a constitution that then gets submitted back to Congress. And if Congress approves it, then they send it to the president to be signed, and then we have a new state. But in that process, Congress looks at the constitution of the state and either approves it or denies it. And they've denied them in the past. Arizona had their first constitution denied, and they rewrote it, and then it came back, and then they turned around and changed it, amended it back to what it was before. But that means that Congress looked at the Constitution of Texas when Texas was admitted, and they approved it.
Yep.
So why would they approve it if secession had already been determined that it could never happen? So obviously there's Texas, right? We're in 1869 here. So most immediately we had the Confederacy, and 13 of those states certainly thought that they had the constitutional authority to secede. We've already referenced the nullification crisis in South Carolina and nullifying federal law and the states being supreme over the federal government. We have the Hartford Convention, which, if I'm remembering correctly, this was a group of, I want to say they were Federalists, but don't shoot me if I'm wrong on that, during the War of 1812, that wanted to bring the War of 1812 to an end, and they met in Hartford, Connecticut, and they drew up their own constitution and talked about the New England states seceding. And of course, while they were doing that, the Brits went home and the war was over, and so they sort of lost favor and all that. But point being, they were discussing it. It didn't happen, but they had a convention to talk about it, and if everybody knew that the Constitution didn't allow it, then why would they be talking about it? Of course, we have Aaron Burr. If you remember that whole controversy in the Essex Junto, I don't know how to pronounce that word. This group of Federalists, again, who were interested in talking about the New England states seceding from the Union, getting away from the tyranny of Thomas Jefferson. And of course, that didn't happen, but they were seeking it. It was a discussion.
Right.
And nobody said, "Oh no, the union is perpetual. You can't do that." And Neil's point in all of this is that the question of secession has been ongoing. It has been part of the national identity almost. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and certainly, that they will argue that that's why the 10th Amendment is written the way that it is it actually provides a check on the federal government that the states, if they don't like the union, if it's not working for them anymore, they can say, you know what, it's been great, but you know what, we're going to move on. And that, of course, forces the union to bow to the will of the states, which was the whole purpose to begin with. So historically, Chase is just wrong about the nature of the union. Nobody's ever seen it as perpetual.
So it makes me wonder, like, was the purpose, because this is a reconstructing government, it's, like it was a political tactic where, Lincoln's already dead, right? So whoever's
Yep.
in the White House says, "Hey, Reconstructionist governance, we need this case to come to court, and this is how we're going to shut the secessionist up. We're never going to have this happen again. We're going to argue that it was perpetual, is perpetual, will always be perpetual, which is what perpetual means. Uh, but it's it seems to me to be a very purposeful shut up about secession, guys. You lost. And this goes back to a point that we've made in a previous podcast, that the southern states have really been occupied territory since the Civil War, and the tyranny instituted by Lincoln has never been diminished. It's never been abolished, certainly, but it's never been diminished even, and it's been carried out through court decisions like this, and obviously bootleg uh, congressional mishaps. But Max, it looks like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I had a thought, I mean, in the light of coming up with a discussion for the actual non-perpetual union is what meant to be. We are going to be talking about that Article 7. But the same way, I think maybe, I don't know if that's the right word to use, a utilitarian argument here. But you have a union that you're entering, and you're entering as a perpetual union. Then there is no, what's the word? There is no incentive for the states to make a union better, because they can never leave the union. So the union is sealed as it is. But if you're entering a union that is not perpetual union, and the states can live, then this provides a reason and a desire for the federal state to make the union, keep making it such a way that states don't leave the union. That's what makes union a good union, is that you have an interest in all of the states remaining as the members of the union. Therefore, you listen and you adhere to the states, what they need, and meet their needs. And what you do, you create the mechanism, the union that is actually always working to be better. And then the state says, we are unhappy, we will leave. That requires the federal government look and say, okay, we don't want you to leave. What can we make better? So it allows that a conversation between the state and the union to keep them a part of it. And it leaves both parties with interest. When you remove one side and make it a one-sided union, um, it's no longer mutually beneficial union.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me like this is, if I am personally going to some kind of agreement in the union, that would be I'll be arguing for. I will be a member of this club of yours, so to speak, but here are my concerns. I want to be able to voice my opinion. But if I am being told that no, I'm going to join this club and I can never leave, then what's...
Yeah, it makes the states slaves of the federal government.
Mhm.
Right? You can come in, but you can never leave.
It's like a Hotel California. You can check in, but you can never check out.
Yep.
This brings up another interesting thought. Like, we've discussed the border issue, and that's clearly an issue. But think about this. The Ukraine war is largely unpopular. Is that fair? I
Mhm.
mean, I think the popular opinion is we don't want to mess with Ukraine, Russia. We want to fix what's at home, right? So it seems to me that a war like that, or a war like what's going on with Hamas and Israel, that a state that has a populist leader could use war as an issue to say, we're out. We don't want to give you money anymore. We don't want to send our sons and daughters overseas, which I don't know if you guys read what I sent you or watched the video clip, but evidently it's planned for us to go over to Ukraine and put boots on ground officially. I don't know if you
Yeah.
saw that. That was an interesting article.
I don't know how legit it is, but yeah.
Well, it was a comment made by one of Biden's cabinet. I can't remember who it was now. Mayorkas, maybe. I don't know. No, it wouldn't have been a Mayorkas. I don't remember who it was. It was somebody that's a cabinet member. But my point is, we got the border thing. We've got, any number of reasons why a state would. But to me, it seems like the threat of war with a federal, it's especially as big as the United States is, that a state would be crazy to enter a union without that back door, right? Like, no state legislator, unless it was just money that they're being offered, a big enough carrot maybe. But there's no thinking body of people that would say, wait a second, that means I've got to assent to every decision that comes from the feds on what they do internationally? I think not.
Forever, yeah.
Right? How is that? We're not the same people here. We're like, I as a Texan, a displaced Texan, but a Texan nonetheless, have very different likes, dreams, desires, opinions than the East Coast and the West Coast. They might be upset about some trade issue that I'm not because I've got a port. I don't know. It's just like, what state in the right mind would join a perpetual union? I don't think it would happen.
And I think Neil addresses this somewhat when the next thing that he goes into actually in the essay is he talks about the nature of the union during the ratification process and how it actually proves that the union was not perpetual. He simply...
Well, 7. We're running up on time. We have 8 minutes or so left. Jason, can we talk about this? Because you're good at that stuff. Article 7, we were going to discuss that, how it actually helps or the point that Gordon is making.
I don't know what you're asking me.
In Article 7, we're talking about, what is in my paper? It was on the last page we were looking at earlier. That shows about that union, in fact, is non-perpetual union, was inherited in the Constitution.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying right now.
Yes. So
yeah.
Can we expand on that?
Oh, okay. He's telling me to continue.
He interrupts you to say, continue, please.
Oh, okay.
Well, this is where he was going. I was just...
I'm leaving that in. I am not editing that out. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, that's where I'm going. So Article 7 of the Constitution deals with ratification of the Constitution and when it actually takes force, when it comes into effect. And what it states is that the ratification of the Convention of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. Now remember, there's 13 states, right?
Yep.
But 2/3 of them had to ratify the Constitution in order for it to take effect. And what the Constitution says is that as soon as 9 of the states ratify it, then the Constitution between the states, or it shall establish the Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same. In other words, between those 9 states.
And the other 4.
But not the other 4.
Right.
Yes.
There's no other 4.
And that's exactly what happened. There was 9 states who ratified the Constitution. It took effect, June 21st, 1778, when the 9th state, New Hampshire, agreed to the terms of the Constitution, and the Constitution was then in force. And the new nation existed there was a union between those 9 states, but the other 4 were excluded. The 2 largest states joined shortly thereafter, Virginia and New York, July 25th and 26th, respectively. But there were 2 states, North Carolina and Rhode Island, that remained outside the Union. In fact, the first presidential election took place without them because they weren't part of the Union. Now, I don't know how a perpetual union has states that leave it,
right,
and then come back. Like the union's not perpetual. It just isn't. It's inherently not perpetual. Both of those states, of course, later joined, but there was unequivocally a period in time in which there were states that were not members of the Union.
Can we talk about just real quick how a state, any state, the United States, right? Any state that claims perpetuity is necessarily claiming an attribute of God and therefore idolatrous inherently? This is there is nothing in this world that's perpetual.
Nothing.
Other than the laws that God has established after his own nature.
Yep.
And so we talk sometimes about taxation, how, demanding more than 10% is demanding more than God demands. Therefore, it's tyranny. Therefore, they're setting themselves up as a pseudo God, another God. Well, this is just another form of that. You're claiming self-existence or unchanged. I don't know. You're claiming an attribute of God as your own. Therefore, the beast, which is what it is claiming deity in that decision, in that Supreme Court decision. They're claiming another attribute of deity that is not theirs. Is that a fair thing to say? I think that's a great observation, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, it is a great observation. I think it's 100% correct. The Lord is perpetual.
Right.
He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He has always been and will always be. The United States of America doesn't have that attribute.
No.
Even though
even
they claim
the
it
most
for
ardent
themselves.
statists will not say that the United States will exist forever.
Right.
Civilizations rise and fall.
Yep.
Governments come and go. That's just the course of human history. And to claim otherwise, I think it's an implicit claim of deity. It's a usurpation of Christ's throne.
Amen.
Absolutely. And I think implicit is the word to use, because I'm not saying explicitly they're saying we're God or we're going to exist forever. But by saying that the union cannot dissolve, it cannot separate, or at the very least, it cannot lose part of itself. That's what it is, an implicit claim on deified attribute. So,
and then we don't understand this piece is it's a claim that cannot be ever made, because everything changes as people we die. We can desire just to be perpetual, but being by definition humankind, we're not perpetual. We cannot do anything perpetual.
Yeah. And so all this work, and can we just take a second and appreciate the genius of Neil Gordon? All of us, I think we need to just tip our hat. Neil has done some really good work in this chapter. Yes, Neil Gordon, man, I would love to shake your hand one day. But all that work aside, Christians should reject this notion out of hand.
Yes.
Supreme Court decision and brilliant work by Neil Gordon aside, right? This decision is as bootleg as Roe v. Wade was. It's wrong. It's, we've got to start looking at the totality of the circumstances, the exorbitant taxation rate, this idea that we can't leave. When are we going to come together and say, no, you're not God. You're a deacon of God, and you need to act like it. And if you don't, we're out. We're going to go find another deacon. I also say that to my deacons at church from time to time when they don't bring me a beer fast enough. Hopefully they're listening. But that is I think that's the attitude, especially at this point in history, we have to take. Like, bend the knee to Christ, or we're going to go somewhere that does.
Yeah. For the moment,
It's very simplified, and I'm sorry to be overly simplistic, but let's fill that out in our walk. Sorry, Max, didn't mean to cut you off. Continue, please.
what you were saying, what Jason, it's what we've been talking for the last few minutes about this perpetuality. The only thing that is perpetual besides our God is also His kingdom. That union between Christ and the church, that's a perpetual union that will never cease to exist.
Amen.
It's an internal union. As a matter of fact, we as humans, we can say, well, marriage is a perpetual union. Well, it's not. It's dissolved when one of the spouses die, actually. But we don't think in those terms. And now we start claiming that we as a country perpetual, but yet God's kingdom is not. I mean, making that claim against God and His holy ones, Christ, and His church that are proclaimed as to be perpetual unions, and saying that we as a humans establishing exactly another union just like it, that's blasphemous, at the very least.
Also blasphemous for those that don't know Max. Yes, it's blasphemous. You're right.
Oh, whatever.
I think that's a perfect note to end. God's kingdom will never end, right?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is the only perpetual kingdom on this earth.
That's right.
Amen. Amen.
Before we wrap up, I want to mention the clever little thing that Gordon does at the end of this section of the essay, because we mentioned it at the beginning, right?
The escape hatch. Let's do that.
The escape hatch, right? So he gets through all of this and he says, now we can't assume that just because we've demonstrated the faulty logic of our enemy that he will say, oh, okay. In fact, he says we can't assume that just because they've gone from 8th grade to 9th grade that they actually completed algebra and weren't just socially moved on to the next grade, which of course most people in this country, or many people in this country, are.
People in high school that can't read. But go ahead. Sorry.
It is true. So he says, what happens if we just say, okay, fine, we'll accept the precedent of Texas versus White. We'll apply stare decisis. He has this to say. He says, Chase claims that there's no place for reconsideration or revocation except through revolution or through consent of the states. So in the decision itself, Chief Justice Chase says that the union is perpetual unless it's no longer perpetual, and one of the circumstances in which it can become no longer perpetual is through consent of the states. Now, he says, for the sake of argument, let's just grant that the union's perpetual and all those things. But we seek, this is Gordon speaking, we seek to have consent of the states. Let's take it to the states then. Let's see if there's states who want to secede.
Yeah.
And he says in here, he's willing to bet there'll be 26 who would like to, or who would at least like to have it as an option.
Yeah.
Right. And just like, from 1782 up to 1860, secession was common. It was common in the nomenclature. People are discussing it. And I think that's what Neil Gordon is arguing for here is, why don't we have these discussions? Why aren't the states talking about these things? It sounds, in our modern day, in the context we live in, secession almost sounds like treason. Oh, you can't do that. And so people are afraid to talk about it. But the states inherently, for the 10th Amendment, have the right to talk about it and to talk about whether or not it would be best for them. And what's wrong with that conversation?
Right.
Nothing.
Not a thing.
Not a thing.
Yeah. We're well within our rights to do so. And I think the making treason and cessation synonymous is something the federal government wants, right?
Oh,
so let's not fall into that trap.
That's what have been working on, because the federal government wants us to believe that we have no choice.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, listeners, thank you for staying with us this long. This has been a fun podcast. I told you I was excited about it, and I know Jay was. And Max, man, the kingdom never ending. What an insight and a great way to think about this leaving. So please like, share, subscribe. I think the last 2 episodes that we've done are the most important episodes the Bearded Bereans have ever produced. So I'm looking forward to seeing this hitting the airwaves. And like I said last episode, please go back, watch some of the other things that we've done. Let friends know about it, and we will hopefully have a larger conversation with people in our circles. So until next time, thanks for listening. God bless.
The kings who fight against my Lord shall taste his wrath and meet his sword upon